You've been to New York, haven't you?
Yes. Yeah.
So can you answer me this? Is absolutely everyone you bump into on the street in New York either an actor or a playwright? Because that's what it looks like in this week's film.
It does feel that way. No. Everyone on the streets of New York is either unhoused or on drugs or seeking a house or seeking drugs, I guess.
So not a million miles away from what I described, actually, but just...
It's all kinds of people to make the world go round, doesn't it? Hello and welcome everyone to the Two Real Cinema Club. My name is Andres Lorente.
And my name is James Ruzicka. And every episode on the Two Real Cinema Club, it's implied in the name. We watch two movies. We watch a new movie and we watch an old movie. And then we try somehow to draw connections between the two. And usually we have themes. This week we have got a new theme developing on the podcast. Very excited. So for a while we were the leading donkey-based film podcast.
Yeah.
And then last autumn, I think we were the leading Nazi-based film podcast.
Definitely.
And now we seem to have become the leading body swap film podcast.
Yes.
So hard on the heels of The Substance and Face Off, we've watched another pair of films about swapping one life for another. We have watched the new Sebastian Stan independent picture, A Different Man, and we're comparing it to 1982's The Return of Martin Guerre.
So we are just the gift that keeps on giving around this time of year, right? This time of plenty and generosity. And I like it. We've gone from donkeys to Nazis to body swappings.
What will they come up with next?
Did we pair Face Off with The Substance? I don't even remember.
But well, did we? Or maybe that was two people who looked a lot like us.
I think... Wow. This pod is going really deep.
So A Different Man, out this year, directed by, now, correct me if I get this wrong, Aaron Schimberg. Is that right?
That's how I would have pronounced it. Yeah, so you've done well.
So he's made, now I'm a little bit confused whether he's made two previous features or one. I think it is two, one of which is called Go Down Death, and the other is called Chained for Life. But the way I read it online, it might have been possible that he'd only directed one film when the film was called Go Down Death, Chained for Life.
Oh.
Either way, I haven't seen either or one of them. I don't know whether you have.
I haven't either, and I'd not heard of him before. And this film was interesting because it came about, I don't know, sometime in October, late September, maybe October. Looked kind of interesting. Wasn't in the theaters here very long.
No, neither here.
And then it came back to the museum. The museum has a film series too. So someone at the museum seemed to like it and thought it should be screened there. So I was lucky in that way because it was interesting enough in the trailer for me to think I want to see it. And then before I decided to see it, it was gone. And then it came back. That's what people do. Like Martin Guerre, that dude came back, and Different Man also came back.
Low budget movie. I don't know how much they made it for, but I strongly suspect it was not very much. And shame that it hasn't had a particularly long life in theaters, because I think this is a pretty interesting film.
Yeah, it is an interesting film. Yeah, certainly based on the fact that, just a couple of locations ultimately and a pretty small cast. I would agree with you. It must be fairly low budget.
I mean, the only above-the-line name particularly is Sebastian Stan, who is also a producer on the project, I think, isn't he? So I think it's they wouldn't have spent very much money on this, but I'm hoping after this, maybe his next project will get a little bit more exposure. Well, A Different Man. Do you want to tell us what the story is?
I'd be happy to. I'm not sure I understood it all the time, and some people I was around that night certainly didn't understand it, but I bet you know it well, because there's some medicine at play, some dodgy medicine.
There is some medicine, some probably not tremendously accurate medicine, I think. I like a bit of ambiguity.
Yeah, you might be able to explain some things. As you mentioned, directed by Aaron Schimberg, he wrote the screenplay as well.
Yep.
Stars Sebastian Stan as Edward, who I remember, he played Tommy Lee in the Tommy and Patty? It's a Netflix series, so That's what I know him from.
So I know him, and most of the rest of the world, I guess, will recognize him as the Winter Soldier from the MCU. So he is one of my favorite Marvel Cinematic Universe characters, actually.
Yeah, he should. Well, but in the two roles that I've seen him in, pretty impressive range. Oh, and he was actually in I, Tonya as well. He played one of the boyfriend of, I think, of Tanya Harding, right? The figure skating phenom back in the 1990s who had one of her competitors taken out with a baseball bat. But that's a different story. It's not a different man. Renata Reinsve. I'm going to ask you, how would you pronounce her name? Renata Reinsve. She's Norwegian?
I think. She's Norwegian, isn't she?
Yeah.
That's the extent of my attempt at pronouncing her name. I just shrug it off as Norwegian and admit defeat.
Ingrid, I remember her from The Worst Person in the World a couple years ago. Adam Pearson plays Oswald. And yeah, I'll tell you this story, a little bit of it anyway. I want to keep some secrets for after the spoiler bill. The film opens on a facial scan of Edward, who we next see in a film scene where he's in this great pain. And he has a face that I think Sergio Leone would love. It's right up there with Charles Bronson, some of the other greats we've been seeing lately. We learned that he has this... he has a bit part in this corporate good citizenship video thing where it's designed to make workers comfortable with colleagues who suffer from facial deformities. So Edward has some fairly significant facial deformities going on. And it appears there's not much work for him otherwise. He heads back to his apartment building, and he's got a new neighbor. That's Ingrid. She is an aspiring playwright, and she helps him mend a cut on his hand, and this friendship forms potentially a romantic one. Edward visits with his team of doctors and surgeons who suggest that he try some experimental drugs rather than any kind of surgery for his, I'll call them facial differences.
Yeah.
It turns out Ingrid has a boyfriend, so that kind of stops his longing for her a little bit or numbs it. And then casting agents who he sees are bored. We've seen a lot of casting agents recently in our films, have we not? I mean, I feel like that's another. Add that to the list. The other animals that we cover are casting agents in these films. The casting agents are bored with his work. They probably don't see him as screen worthy with his face. There are moments with his beautiful neighbor that are kind of Ingrid are quite pointed and loaded, but they are purely platonic ultimately. So he suffers that setback there. But meanwhile, the drugs that he has decided to take work very quickly, healing that hand, for example, that Ingrid mended. But his life grows chaotic as a hole in his ceiling grows and grows. It's dropping water. It's dropping plaster. I think a rat may have fallen.
I think a rat, yes.
Okay. But it's very much like the skin that's dropping off his face. The deformities are just sort of melting away. And what emerges is this version of his old, quite handsome face. We see in photos and whatnot that as a child he had a fairly normal face. But through the process of bleeding, pulling old skin from his face, and a good bit of vomiting, he becomes this quite handsome man. This metamorphosis of Edward makes him a very attractive, confident man. It's Sebastian Stan. He's a good-looking guy, right?
He's a good-looking guy.
Yeah. He ends up sort of declaring the old Edward dead. Moving out of that awful apartment that's just sort of bleeding rats and water and muck. But will he be happier in the new good-looking life, or will he long to resurrect modest and good-natured Edward of old? Will he hook up with Ingrid now that he is as hot as she is? Or will he sell his soul to a life of lucrative real estate and lots of drinks with beautiful people in bars?
I like the way you ended with a question. That's good. How do you learn to do that? That's good.
Talk about cliches. When we get to the cliche squad, I'm going to call in on ourselves because there's been a lot of this ending our synopses with cliches and questions.
Is it as cliche or is it style? I'm going to go back to like that opening image, because I think this is one of those lessons that I've learned from you, that opening image often gives us a clue to the themes of the whole film.
Yeah.
And it starts out with this computerized sort of 3-dimensional image of Edward's face.
Yeah.
And the image is rotating around, but it's like an optical illusion, isn't it? Because like the more you look at it, I was watching that sort of rotating face, and I couldn't figure out, is it moving to the left or is it moving to the right? It seems to be doing both. It's like it's deliberately ambiguous.
Yeah.
And I think this notion of change being ambiguous, is sort of what underpins the whole movie, isn't it? I think it's actually a really, really clever opening image. So clever that I'm almost wondering, God, did they plan that, or was that just accidental that they realised?
Sure.
Oh, this computer scan, looks like it's going both ways at the same time. But I think it's a really, really clever little opening image. Very clever. It's echoed like a bit later on. So like all in this first act, sort of fairly early on in the movie, one of Edward's neighbours, one of the people that he barely kind of nods and speaks to in the corridor, takes his own life. He hangs himself.
Yeah.
And as Edward is watching out of his window down at the New York street, there's an ambulance, and then there's a taco truck which turns up, and from his kind of bird's eye viewpoint, they sort of both look the same.
Yeah.
And again, that's like a lovely little thing about, two things that look the same from one angle but are actually very different.
Yeah. I think it's an ice cream truck is what it sounded like to me.
Oh, is it?
I think so, yeah. But yeah, it's a very interesting little juxtaposition between the two, and this moment of, great horror, but at the same time, maybe the joy of having an ice cream side by side. That is, yeah, I probably wouldn't mention that, but I did think about mentioning that moment because it is. I think that moment sort of encapsulates this film. It's you're never really sure-footed. It feels like the premise is pretty sure-footed. Like this guy was once suffering from facial deformities. Would appear to most people as ugly or grotesque. They even use him in a video to try and train people to be more sympathetic to people with deformities at work. But at the same time, I think it knows exactly where it's going, right? It's, there's the old life, the new life. And then I think towards the end of this film, it starts to lose its way a little bit. But I think it definitely explores its premise perfectly. It knows what it wants to do to a certain point, and then I think it gets a little loosey-goosey.
Ah, okay. Should we? Well, speaking of loosey-goosey, shall we ring the spoiler bell then?
Yeah, I guess so.
There's a lot to talk about. Is there anything you want to get in before the spoiler bell?
No, I think I prematurely called for it before, and I feel guilty about that. But yeah, let's do it now. Spoiler bell.
I think we should. Yeah. Oh yeah. Right.
Now we can speak.
I feel better
freely.
now. We'll spoil away.
Yeah, speak freely.
So, as far as the themes for the film go, so the important twist for this film is that that Edward is transformed. He turns into a good-looking man who looks like he belongs in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. He gets a job as a real estate agent and moves out to a swanky apartment. But he's kind of haunted by his feelings for Ingrid. Mm-hmm. He bumps into her on the street, follows her to a small independent theatre where she is producing a play. Yeah. Auditions for the play, and the play is actually a dramatisation of his life. Yeah. Before he had his transformation. I mean, not just a dramatisation, but she has literally stolen the words that he had typed on his own typewriter. She has effectively kind of stolen his life and turned it into a play without realizing that he is still alive. Yeah. He gets the role and he's not very good at it.
No, and it's important to say that she wouldn't recognize him because he's had this change of face.
So he's kind of killed off his own version of his past life. He's masquerading as a completely different person.
I wondered about the legality of that. If you just say someone's dead, does that mean they're dead? Because...
Well, I'm assuming Edward will have credit card bills and utilities to pay and things like that. So, maybe it doesn't entirely add up. But then this film doesn't entirely happen in the real world, I would argue. Yeah. Because, this kind of strange magical thing happens at the 1 hour 6 minute mark. I noted it down, which is that the actor Adam Pearson turns up, who is an actor who has neurofibromatosis. And his real face was the model and the mask
Yeah.
for Edward's face in the first half of the film. So he basically looks exactly like Edward did before his transformation. But he's an English character, and he turns up, and he is witty and warm and charismatic and clever, and everybody loves him.
They love him.
And he gets cast in the play as Edward's character. Edward ends up getting written out. And Oswald, who is this new, the Adam Pearson character, kind of takes over his life.
Yes, especially with Ingrid.
Yeah.
I think it's important to also say that at one point, Ingrid and Edward are working very closely together. So they do develop this romantic relationship. They hook up. And for a brief time, he is playing the part of Edward, and he's wearing the mask. There's this mask that his surgeons had given him to remember his old face. And there's this also this scene where she wants to him with the mask on. And we can say here because it's the correct verb. I'm using it as a verb. It's exactly what happened, so there's no swear there. Don't bleep it out.
I'll be bleeping that out.
And then, then Oswald comes in and really just co-opts Edward's life, really. He gets the part in the play, and it's a role that he's born to play. And his face really does look a lot like Edward's formerly did, and I think that's why Ingrid immediately wants to give him the part, because it's so real. And I guess Adam Pearson has made a couple of films with Aaron Schimberg. I think this is their third film together.
Ah, right, okay. He was also in Under the Skin, the Scarlett Johansson film. I don't know if you've seen that.
Ah, no.
Right, yeah, so he does have a kind of like a history on screen.
Yeah. But yeah, then he even takes Ingrid from Edward, really. And it's amazing because everyone loves Oswald, as you said. He is very, very charismatic. And Edward, meanwhile, sort of gets jealous and suspicious. But it's still impossible to hate Oswald because he's such a great dude. And the other thing that you see in Oswald is he's so comfortable with himself in a way that neither new Edward nor old Edward could be. I think that's the thing that gets at him. That's the thing that eats him up a little bit. Is that Oswald seems comfortable with who he is. And, Edward could never be that. He was always kind of this downer person. So
when this is the thing which happens in the second half of the film, this is kind of underlines what I think the theme of the film is. I mean, it's not subtle, it's fairly obvious, but the way I've tried to summarize it is, I can't remember who said that, but the old phrase, wherever you go, there you are. It's that theme that I often expound from Total Recall, insofar as you can't have a holiday from yourself.
Yeah.
Or the way the ancient Greeks would have put it. It's like it's know thyself, isn't it?
Yes.
It's know who you are. In fact, I mean, this is one of my kind of comments on the film, which is that although it's a little bit crazy and sort of pretty indie and kind of lo-fi and a little bit experimental, it is also in many ways very structurally conventional. And one of those very conventional structural steps that it takes is that there is a minor character who boldly states the themes of the film during the first 5 minutes. Pretty much the first time that we watch Edward go to his apartment building, Ingrid is moving in, and there are some guys who are lifting a sofa.
Yep.
To use the word sofa, is that a thing in the States? Is it settee? What's that very, very wide chair that 3 people can sit on? What's that called?
I wouldn't call it a chair. I would call it a sofa.
There we go. Sofa, right. So
there's couch. You can also say couch.
Couch. That's the word. Okay,
and then the old words were Davenport and Chesterfield, which I think both were also cigarettes. I'm not sure about that. But yeah.
So there are 3 guys lifting a Marlboro up the stairs to get into Ingrid's house, into her apartment. And while Edward is waiting for the guys to move the furniture, the building superintendent, whatever, tells him. He says, I wrote it down because it was so obvious. He says, so all unhappiness comes from not accepting what is, he says.
He really?
Tells him that Lady Gaga taught me that.
Oh, I blanked that out. I'm glad you wrote that down. That's super on the nose. For a building superintendent, that's really on the nose. Wow.
This guy had obviously really read the script very carefully before agreeing to do the part. So part of its structural convention is that the guy states the theme, and there's the theme.
Yeah.
It really is that all unhappiness comes from not accepting what is. And it's the fact that Edward can't really accept himself, rather than it's not his neurofibromatosis or his lack of acting talent or any of these things which are what make him unhappy. What makes him unhappy is that he's not comfortable in his skin, whatever shape his skin is.
Yeah.
So I think the film expounds that and explores that pretty effectively. So the film knows what it is, and and it just doesn't waste any time umming and ahhing. It tells you what it's about, and it gets there.
Yeah, I think a theme would be, how would I put it? You can change your face, you can change what other people are seeing, but you can't change your inner being.
Ah, yeah.
Maybe it's always easy to rhyme stuff and remember it that way. And it does actually commit another sort of, I don't know if this is a cliche. I'm going to say it's, I should save that maybe. Ooh, did I say the word? Nope. I didn't. Bleep that one out. I'll save that one for later, maybe.
Okay, the cliche squad informants are already picking up the phone. Yeah, carry on, yeah.
As you mentioned, Edward gets basically written out of the part in the play entirely, and Ingrid's played entirely. So the very inspiration for the play is written out. I think at one point, doesn't he have a kiss? That's all it is. He plays the new face, right? After Oswald has had the surgeries or whatnot. Then Edward comes out and kisses someone at the end, and then even that role disappears, and he just freaks out. He pokes a hole in the stage version of the apartment ceiling, which leads to the entire ceiling and maybe the lighting gear. We saw that recently too, right? A lighting rack come down to the ground.
Oh yeah, that was Friday night. The other week, Saturday night.
Anyway, he has freaked out. He's basically gone crazy, and the whole thing falls on him. And this is after, I think, at work he started wearing his mask to show houses, and people were freaked out by that. So he loses his job basically, and he interrupts this show, and he gets madly injured, and then all of a sudden he ends up in the hospital. At first,
and it's a real comedy hospital, isn't it?
Yeah.
He's broken, effectively every bone in his body, and he's entirely encased in plaster of Paris.
Yes, he's in plaster of Paris everywhere. He's in traction basically, and he ends up living in a full body cast in the apartment of Ingrid and Oswald, and I think Ingrid is already pregnant at that point. I forget. And then oddly, out of nowhere, he just kills his physical therapist, or maims him. I don't know how far that went. There was a lot of blood.
Yeah, stabs him pretty badly.
In the heart, I think, too. Ooh. So that was a huge tone shift in this film. He's in prison for half a second. He runs into Oswald on the street where Ingrid has a new play, and then there's this final scene kind of where Oswald and Ingrid are off to join a drug-using nudist cult in Canada. And then the other line of dialogue, which sort of matches that opening line, Edward can't decide what to eat on the menu in the restaurant, and then Oswald says to him, "You haven't changed a bit, old friend." Which seems like, and then to bring it back to the beginning shot, the facial recognition is mirrored at the very end by just long shot of Edward's face. He's got glasses on. He's older. He's gray haired by now, and the film, I don't think, knew where to take it at some point. I think for me, it really ran out of gas and just kind of lost its way. Certainly by the time he freaks out on stage and then ends up living with them and then killing the physical therapist, I thought, what? How does this? I mean, it's nice. It's a different kind of filmmaking, but it just didn't feel very coherent to me. And I think that's the one problem I had, because I didn't see much value in that, especially because he doesn't spend much time in prison. It's he gets hit by a basketball in the head or something like that in prison, and then he's out and walking the streets. So it's like
20 years fly by.
Yeah, I think there's a certain, if you go so far as to quite violently kill someone in a scene, you've got to have some consequences, or you've got a whole new element of his brain to explore, or there has to be some sort of redemption or something. And that was an odd I don't know if it was 5 minutes. That was a very strange 2 minutes of the film, which kind of derailed everything before.
It did rather remind me of Saturday Night Again, insofar as that film showed that when they couldn't think of an end of a sketch, John Belushi would just fall over and pretend to die.
Exactly.
It felt a little bit like the same. They couldn't quite figure out how to make the movie end, so we'll stab some guy, and then maybe he comes out of prison. And it all kind of happens a little bit quickly and strangely. It is a slightly peculiar ending.
It comes back to me. We had a conversation not so long ago we're all getting old on this podcast, but we talked about endings of films maybe a year and a half or 2 years ago, and how
endings are hard.
Yeah, and how hard that is for a lot of people. But for me, I work backwards. I'm kind of focusing on, and I think that relates back to looking at first image and last image of a film. You establish those 2 points, and then you know where you're starting and you know where you're ending. So I think generally you should know where you're going to end. And it should be very, very clear and very obvious what you need to do. And, that might change a little bit in the production of the film, but when we talk about Martin Guerre, that film knew exactly where it was going. Its ending made sense, and it concluded very logically, And this film does not quite do that. And as a result, we're still asking questions at the end when I really want, some answers. This is not I don't like to go home and think about films for 2 or 3 hours to figure out what they're really all about. I really kind of want the filmmakers to make it very clear, and I didn't get this one at all.
I suppose it's both not clear enough and excessively clear as far as it ends with that sentence of somebody explaining what the theme was again.
Yes.
There is a I couldn't agree more. I think you're right. But it's a little bit of a shame. But maybe it's wrong to have too high an expectation for a film which is, has been made, quickly and cheaply. Yeah. I did read. I think it's something like it was a 22-day shooting schedule. I think they hammered through this film at super quick speed.
Yep.
Didn't have much money to spend.
Yeah.
And the fact that they've come out with something which is quite so interesting.
Yeah.
I think pretty thematically rich.
Yeah,
I take my hat off to them.
Yeah.
The obvious comparison is David Lynch. For this film, insofar as clearly it recalls The Elephant Man. I'm pretty sure that the character in that film also had neurofibromatosis.
Yeah.
But in a way, it has a lot more in common with Mulholland Drive, I think, which is a film which is sort of about it is about actors and it is about people kind of taking each other's places and things like that. And there is also something I also read a little comment here that. The other thing it reminds me of, I don't know whether you have ever seen this, in about the year something like 2000, David Lynch was paid an enormous amount of money to make an advert for Sony for the PlayStation 2 for third place. I don't know if you've ever seen that. You can see it on YouTube.
Okay.
It's utterly the craziest 60 seconds of advertising for a computer, like a video game console ever. It's utterly nuts. But joyfully, amazingly nuts. And kind of this... like the world that this film sort of happens in is like a little bit like this strange sort of dreamlike third place. It seems on the surface to happen in this, at the sort of the pedestrian concrete New York that we know.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's sort of magical and surreal, isn't it? When Oswald turns up and he looks exactly like Edward did. A few weeks ago, and the whole world is then suddenly turned upside down. There's all these kind of mirrors in the film, isn't it? They foreshadow this, pretty hard. There's a theme of sort of copying, isn't there? There's all these mirrors in the doctor's conference room when they're talking about starting the new treatment for Edward.
Yeah.
There's this kind of living statue guy who appears a few times.
Yes.
He's like, is it Abraham Lincoln he's being?
He is Lincoln. I wrote Lincoln in my notes, then I went back and I couldn't even remember why I wrote Lincoln. There, it was Lincoln in the park. Yeah,
Lincoln turns but he's kind of like standing still, staring at Edward while Edward stands still and stares at him.
Yeah,
and even this kind of the way that Ingrid copies Edward's prose from this little bit of paper that he fed into his typewriter before he gave it to her.
Yeah,
all this kind of copying. And then Oswald turns up as a sort of copy of Edward.
Yeah.
It's mirrors within mirrors within mirrors, isn't it?
Yeah.
And all of it sort of like it reminds me of kind of loneliness, isn't it? Of separateness. It's like, a lot of the film feels like it's explicitly about being outside looking in. Even the people who are inside looking out, they're all kind of somehow, or at least Edward always seems eternally excluded, even when he's included.
Well, he's included to the extent that he's being looked at a lot, right? Especially before he's served. And I think that's the idea of the Lincoln thing, is that all of a sudden he's the one who's looking at someone else who's supposed to be just still and looked at. I think that's it.
That's good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think there's some themes that are in there. They're a little hard to poke around and find, but I think that's probably what it is that he's generally been seen as just this novelty, right? and stared at. So he gets a chance to start staring. But those are two brief moments with Lincoln, and I think that's what that's about.
I mean, it is interesting that it although the film sort of mirrors the Elephant Man, it is sort of literally doing the opposite of the Elephant Man.
Yeah.
It's actively resisting that kind of victim story.
Yeah.
There's is it Mask that shares in that picture, isn't it? Or the Elephant Man, or Man Without a Face, a kind of a Mel Gibson movie from the 90s. And it's actively not doing all those things. It's not saying, look at this poor guy.
Yeah.
It's saying, the reason that the guy feels sad has nothing to do with the fact that he looks like this. It's because of the person inside.
Yeah.
And it's also resisting that sort of Nightmare on Elm Street thing of having a disfigured character be a wicked baddie. I mean, it's amazing that still happens. I don't know whether you saw No Time to Die, the most recent James Bond film.
No.
They're still doing that. Was it Rami Malek's in that movie?
Oh, yeah.
And he has this kind of burned face, which tells you at the moment that he arrives on screen, well, this guy's a baddie. He's got a burned face. Must be evil.
It's easy. It's a shortcut.
It's stepping over all that sort of all that crap.
And I think one thing I really like about this film is it's very much about acceptance and inclusion, right? And they kind of make that very, very clear at the beginning when they're making this corporate video to teach people or sort of, help people work with colleagues who don't look like them. So I think that's very much what it's about on one level, and I like that very much. I was reading that I think
Aaron Schimberg, who's the director, does have a cleft palate, I think.
Okay.
So he is used to being judged on his appearance as well. So there's a big bit of him in this movie, I'm guessing.
I think it's interesting that we, in all transparency, we thought about pairing this with Elephant Man. Seemed like an obvious choice. In the back of my head, I thought Mask as well could work.
Right.
But I think we were really settled on a completely different film. That's my fault, but
I think cleverly the film that you have chosen to pair this film with has a much deeper meaning or much deeper reading of the meanings of A Different Man.
Yeah,
so I think actually it much more cleverly reflects the new film.
I think they paired well,
Man or Mask or any of those pictures. Yeah,
it's not nearly as much on the nose, but I guess. I would say that there's something very honest. I know that I've complained about this film not knowing where to end, but it very honestly foretells that because Ingrid doesn't know how to end the play, right? She's rewriting the play. There are a lot of these tells.
Oh, that's good.
And I'll get to it a bit more in cliche, but there are a lot of tells that come out of the play itself. So the story, we're getting the large story of Edward over the course of the whole film, but within that, there's in the second and third acts, there's this whole play development and production, and we sort of get the tell again. So we learn that they're having troubles finishing the film. And as soon as I saw that, I thought, okay, that makes kind of sense because you're obviously not ending it very cleanly or very clearly. And because it's so much about acceptance and inclusion, it's oddly an easy story for a protagonist who's had such a difficult life. I mean, he shows that quite a bit in the first act where they'll be walking by the window where he's eating and people will just stare at him for a little while, or people in bars will always say, "Oh, I know you," even though they don't. And his life is pretty easy. And then it's odd because they treat him differently than they treat Oswald, it seems, for some reason. Oswald seems to be popular everywhere. No one bats an eye when he walks into a room, and he starts charming everyone. So it's and I think what that points out is that it's really much more about who you are inside than who you are on the surface. So I think those moments actually support that theme that you were talking about. In the sense that people love Oswald because he obviously loves himself and he's just a great character. Whereas Edward was definitely more dour, I guess, more depressed all the time. And that's why people were staring at him. I mean, it's kind of a stretch because he has such a unique face that he's going to stop some people in their tracks. But that was definitely in there as well.
I mean, I'm guessing the whole movie, is it from Edward's point of view? I cannot recall a scene that he is not in. I think he is present in every scene. And so we can understand how if the worldview of the movie is skewed towards his personal worldview, then his not fitting in will be amplified when it applies to him and then attenuated. It's a good word, isn't it? I like that.
God,
attenuated when when he's watching how other people react to Oswald. Because I suppose there's that temptation to think, well, it's all right for him, he's fine. Whereas when it happens to me, it's something completely different. So there may be an element of sort of distortion of point of view, possibly from the. But maybe I'm being a little bit generous. It is worth mentioning. I am going to sort of take my hat off to Sebastian Stan.
Yeah.
I wonder whether he'll be in for an Oscar nod for this. It's not necessarily an absolutely fantastic, incredible performance, but it's considerably more nuanced and interesting than I was expecting from the guy who plays the Winter Soldier in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Yeah. Though, interestingly, I don't know whether you've seen any of those Captain America films where he appears. There is a little bit of a thematic link, I think. The first time the Winter Soldier appears in his movie, most of his face is covered. We only really see his eyes, and he also is a little bit separate from the rest of the world, and he's sort of on the outside looking in. He watches the world remotely in the same sort of way that Edward does. So I can understand why he might be a good person to approach for a role like this. Yeah. But I thought he did good. He did good.
There's one piece of exposition that never is explained, and I know just the medical person to ask about this. It looks like Edward has a normal childhood and a normal face, and that's hinted at, and I think we see a photo of him and his mother. It's never explained. Do we need to know that, and what would it be?
What his diagnosis?
Yeah.
So I'm pretty sure that Edward in the film, like Adam Pearson in real life, has neurofibromatosis.
Okay.
So this is you end up with a whole bunch of, I think, benign skin growths.
Yeah.
So you end up with this very disfigured, unusual, different facial appearance. Yeah. There was a guy with neurofibromatosis who used to hang around Charing Cross Hospital when I was working there. This is 25 years ago, whatever. So one would often see him around. People with neurofibromatosis do not all look the same. So it is very unusual that Oswald and Edward in this film look identical. Yeah. But interestingly, Adam Pearson, the actor, so he has neurofibromatosis. He is one of a pair of identical twins. His brother does not have neurofibromatosis.
Wow.
So yes, very interesting story. Sadly, not really treatable.
Yeah.
At least, certainly not treatable in the way that it is in this film.
Yeah.
And I must say, any film where there's a new experimental treatment which heals a cut finger as quickly and thoroughly as that, well, you are experimenting with some pretty world-changing, revolutionary medical technology there. So I found it a little bit difficult to believe that they would do an experiment on a single guy and then just leave the whole thing. This is pretty world-changing.
Well, he died. They lost their one subject, really. As far as I'm concerned.
Oh yes, of course.
Bad luck. Bad luck.
I do want to quickly mention the music for the film. The theme of it's kind of jazzy and sort of unsettling, and the theme, like Edward's theme from the movie, is still running around in my head. It's a really unconventional score, and I think really, really successful. So it's not orchestral, and it's not a guy with a synthesizer, which would be like the cheapest and most obvious way to score this movie. It's like a little sort of jazz quartet or something, I think, isn't it, that's done the music. It's interesting, unique, very successful score.
Yeah. I felt like it captured New York. It was kind of like a New York score to me. It definitely felt like a city thing. So, and in that case, it helps establish story world because, most of this is in a couple of different apartments and then in the theater and a couple of bars. There's not a ton of exterior shooting. There's not a wealth of locations, so I think music helps to establish that tone and that feel.
Right. Yep. Just speaking of location, there's one tiny little bit of movie trivia which I have to share. Yeah. Which will probably not interest anybody except me. Yeah. Which is that the theatre where Ingrid and Edward are putting on this play. Yeah. So it's the Wild Project Theatre, which is on East 3rd Street, and it is pretty much exactly 10 blocks away from Dog's apartment in Robot Dreams.
Oh my God.
He lives on East 13th Street, and it's just a short 10-block walk to where this movie happens.
Wow.
That is utter trivia. Why did I spend 25 minutes on Google Maps proving that? I don't know, but it's true.
How did you determine that the Wild Project was on East 3rd Street?
Well, you can look up shooting locations on the IMDb. So they will tell you, where the movie was filmed.
Yeah.
And then Google does the rest of the work.
Wow. Well, hand it to the East Village. That's hot. Couple big films.
So what you mean is I really need a hobby. You're right.
Well, there are other ways to spend your time, but who am I to judge? That's crazy.
You have already alluded to this. I can hear them warming the squad car up. Would you like to be the one who places the call this week to the Cliche Squad?
Yes. This is an international number, 1-800-CLICHE with an accent.
Cliche Squad.
Right. Tell me the worst of it.
I honestly, I'm not gonna belabor things too much. I think there's a cliche of casting agents that we've just happened to run into in the last 3 shows, I think. So casting agents as either being completely inattentive, I guess, or just absolute bastards, or just stupid. That's what they always are, it seems to be. So the auditions we've seen of late have all felt really similar in one way, and I think they're just getting to be a cliche.
Yep.
The other one is a structural or a storytelling convention that I think might be getting overdone. I think we most recently saw in All About My Mother, like using one artwork and it sort of directly telegraphs or explains another artwork. So it's the function of the play here to give us story as opposed to just giving us the story more directly, I think. So you're basically copying a structure, and it's interesting here because it's almost the reverse, I guess. Like All About My Mother, I think is it Streetcar? It's not Streetcar. Is it Streetcar Named Desire? No, or All About Eve. She's playing
All About Eve. That's it. Yeah,
I think it's All About Eve. So he's taking this other film and sort of using that story to write a new script, make a new film. Here it's a little different in the sense that the play is buried into the existing original screenplay. But the function is kind of the same, where you're using this other material to try and explain things. And I think in really good writing, you don't need that. You can just do it the one time.
You don't need a play within a play. Just do the play.
Yeah, do the play. Do the play. That's it. That should be a quote. We could do that in the first 5 minutes of the film sometime. Do the play.
Do the play.
Those are my big 2 takes, but I'm sure you found some other interesting cliches.
Well, I have 2 that I wrote down on my list, and underneath that I wrote churlish. It's kind of churlish to complain when the film, as inexpensively made as this, takes a few shortcuts. Oh, come on, I'll give you a buy. But I do wonder whether Oswald is a little bit too much of an Englishman in New York. Yeah, he's British and he turns up and he really kind of hams it up a bit. He's all kind of quirky, fish and chips, mate. And yes. Pass the ketchup, mate, and he's got a heavy accent, and he's using these long words, and it's all just. I don't think many British people in New York are actually like that. It felt a little bit, I agree, just a little bit, too hard. And then the other thing was just there is this transformation scene where Sebastian Stan is kind of ripping his latex face off in a bathroom mirror, and I do feel like we have seen that exact scene quite a lot of times.
I think recently too, right? Substance, maybe.
I think the Substance, did exactly that, didn't it? It's a scene from Poltergeist, isn't it? More or less, shot for shot. I think tearing latex off in the bathroom mirror. It's just, but if you're shooting on location in somebody's actual apartment, you have a pretty limited number of locations where someone can rip their latex face off. So I'm not going to labour it, but. Well done to them for getting something done with so little money. Yeah,
and something original. There's nothing else like it. It's pretty unique. It's strange. I love strange. I mean, I know I was complaining earlier about weird things happening. I generally like weird things happening, but I want them to happen for more purpose, I guess. But yeah, well done. I mean, they got the film made. That's a short schedule, so that's a busy 3 weeks.
Yeah, oh my God.
A film. So congratulations to them. And I liked it. I'm not saying I don't like it. I think it's a good film, but could have ended a bit more cleanly and probably been more powerful in its delivery of theme as a result.
But maybe this is Aaron Schimberg's ticket to a movie which is more than 3 weeks to shoot and more than $25 to make the film. So
probably
it'd be interesting to see what he comes up with next. Looking forward to it.
I would
well, should we have a break?
I think we should, yeah.
And then we will come back and we'll talk about the return of Martin Guerre.
Oh, he's coming back.
This episode of the Two Real Cinema Club is brought to you by Tim's Mints, the minty fresh breath saviours that don't just freshen your mouth, they actively beat it into submission. In 3 exciting flavours, peppermint, spearmint and strawberry, which I think that's not a mint, is it? Tim's Mints are here to help you pucker up, lock lips, or just survive someone talking too close to you on a long bus journey. Tim's Mints will soothe your throat when winter bites and cool your tongue when summer blazes. Please read this part quickly. No, that's that part's for me. Sorry, wait a second. Okay, so ingredients may include aspartame, saccharin, sucralose, stevia, cyclamate, erythritol, xylitol, sorbitol, neotame, lactitol, uranium-238, cocaine, nicotine, cobalt-60, anthrax, in brackets, trace amounts, and methohexitone. That's a very old anesthetic agent. Not sure what that's there. And then they say, why stop at fresh breath when you can go sugar-free and nuclear? Side effects may include bleeding from the gums and eyes, hair loss, personality changes, weight gain, weight loss, weight redistribution, I'm not sure what that is, weight just evaporating from one side of your body only, and extraordinarily vivid nightmares. Tim's Mints, when you need a mint, these are probably fine. Oh, that's quite the catchy slogan, isn't it? Okay, good. I'm sure that Robert Kennedy will clear up all that stuff about uranium-238 in the gum. Okay, good. And welcome back. So, I don't know about you, there has been so much talk of politics in the last few weeks. So it's been really nice to watch something that is completely divorced from modern politics. So this week, we have watched a film all about a large blonde man who lies incessantly and spends most of his time mired in legal action. And although he's surrounded by people, none of them want to fact check him. And finally, when somebody does fact check him, he just continues to lie and brazen it out. We have watched 1982's The Return of Martin Guerre.
You're absolutely
now
right.
You chose this film, not me. So, and I'm glad you did. I think it's a brilliant pairing. But why did you choose to pair this with a different man?
Do you have any other questions for me, Counsel?
Oh my God! There we go. Ooh. Normally, I put it in my tell me why notes. For a moment, I couldn't see them. Why did I choose this?
I have no idea.
I hadn't seen this probably in 20 years or more. It's a 42-year-old film now. Is that right? 1982? Yeah. Stories of impersonation. I think that's what struck me, is that there's some sort of theme here or connection here between being who you are not, something like that. I think Depardieu is in the back of my mind. I think he plays, this is not really a sympathetic word, but he plays monsters very well. Cyrano de Bergerac with the big nose. Jean de Florette, he has this hunchback. Life of Pi, he's just an absolute bastard. And Camille Claudel, he plays Rodin, right? Auguste Rodin. And he's not a very nice guy there, and he seems kind of monstrous there. So Depardieu brings this, without any deformities, he can still seem monstrous, I think. And I think in the back of my mind, I wanted to see Depardieu do this again, because it is quite a good film. So I think that's probably why, just this idea of pretending to be someone that you're not. And I think that, and I didn't know A Different Man too well, just the trailer. So I was just sort of guessing, pulling at some strings, but I think it worked pretty well. I mean, I
think they worked very well. Good, good guess.
Yeah.
It's the film. It's directed by Daniel Veen, I think he's done an awful lot of French language work, which I have not seen. I think this is his most well-known feature. He did direct some episodes of Highlander, the TV series. I haven't seen that, but at least it's something I recognised in his CV. But it's written by, so Veen, by Natalie Zemon-Davis. Or she might be Natalie Zeman-Davis, I don't know. But she is an academic who researched the actual original court case. And also a screenplay written by Jean-Claude Carrière, who wrote everything. So he wrote, so I started making a list of some of the films that he wrote. Amazing. He wrote The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, which is a black and white television series I used to watch. It was rerun on BBC when I was a boy. Diary of a Chambermaid, Belle de Jour, Discreet Charm of the Bourgeoisie, Obscure Object of Desire, Tin Drum, Unbearable Lightness of Being, Cyrano de Bergerac. And still writing in 2004 when he wrote Birth, that Nicole Kidman movie. So incredible writing career from him. Astonishing. And this kind of sits right in the middle of that in 1982. The other thing it's probably worth saying, it should be, I wrote here in my notes, it should be noted that Gerard Depardieu is due in court over 2 counts of sexual assault in March next year. And he is surrounded by almost innumerable accusations of sexual misconduct. So not necessarily our intention to suggest that we think he's a great bloke.
Not a great bloke.
All that said, shall I tell you the story?
Please do. I love this one. This is a good one.
I promise I'll end with a question mark.
Okay.
It's France, 1542. A local official makes his way to a remote village where he is charged with clearing up a legal matter. Martin Guerre, a local farmer, husband to Bertrande, has returned from 8 years away at war in Spain. His wife and son, his sisters and family friends all welcome him with open arms, but when Martin asks his uncle for the income his lands earned in the 8 years away, the uncle becomes suspicious. Is this Martin Guerre, who seems so much bigger and tougher after his stint in the army? Is he the real Martin Guerre, or is he an imposter? Only the Toulouse authorities can rule on this matter after asking everyone in the village for their opinion. But what will they decide, and what will be the price to pay for all of this division?
That is a question. Yes.
That is a question.
For a moment there, you veered away from, you had one question, you veered away for it, and then you came back for the question. All right.
It's like mirrors within mirrors.
That's a hint. I'll follow the formula next time.
So this film is kind of, this is a classic film about the life of the imposter. I feel like maybe still, certainly 20 years ago, you could say, this is a bit like Martin Guerre, and everyone would know what you were talking about. The notion of someone who comes back and may or may not be, we'll ring a spoiler bell in a minute, who they claim to be. This feels like a universal cultural touchstone. And I think it goes through, every part of that internal argument about whether someone is an imposter or not. There's initial joy, there is suspicion, there are fears that are relayed, there are new facts unearthed. And also it does finally, at the end of the movie, it does indirectly ask the question, does it even matter? So, it goes through all of those stages, analyzes it very deeply. I really enjoyed it this time around. I also had seen it, maybe 30 years ago. Watching it again, there's an awful lot to enjoy, isn't there?
There is, yeah. And I think it's important to note that it was an American film called Summersby. Jodie Foster and was it Richard Gere?
Richard Gere, I think, isn't it?
Was made. That's a '90s film, I suspect. So I mean, it was sort of remade in an American version using the Civil War as sort of the context and background. I didn't hate that film. I don't remember it terribly well, but I thought it was pretty good. And then I realized, it's Martin Guerre. I think it's very obviously Martin Guerre. I don't think they hide that at all. But and I guess basically a true story because, as you said, there was I think there's a novel, but I think there was also a lot of research that went into the historical research going into the novel itself that it's all based on. So
Predictably enough, I have read the novel this week, actually.
I knew that was going to happen. I knew that.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I mean, calling it a novel is generous. It's 50 pages long.
Oh, okay.
So it's a novelette. It's a novella or something like that.
Yeah.
It's by Alexander Dumbass, as every 13-year-old boy will have joked around the world. So it's Alexander Dumas. It is based on original court documents.
Yeah.
Interestingly, aside from the basic setup, the book is pretty different to the film. Even it's only 50 pages long. Should we ring the spoiler bell? And then we can talk a little bit about differences between the book and the movie.
There must be a different sounding spoiler bell for the old films because they didn't have the same kinds of bells that we have today.
I'm pretty sure there would be some 400-year-old bells around somewhere, especially in France.
Nice.
Anyway, we can't afford another bell, so we've got to stick with the same.
All right, that's good. That'll do. Oh, that sounds nice.
It sounds like a bell echoing across the French countryside. Yeah. So in the book, Alexander Dumas explains the deception right from the start. So there is no mystery. He says right from the beginning, he explains that Arnaud Dutil, who is the imposter in the movie, befriends the real Martin Guerre, and realizing that Martin Guerre is almost certainly going to die because he's injured his leg, and is about to lose the leg and will almost certainly die. He plies him with booze and drugs, I think, and gets him to tell him all of the details of his life. And then goes back to the village and pretends to be him. So there is no mystery in the book at all. And interestingly, at the end of the book, he's Arnaud, Martin Guerre, he's rumbled because he has an affair with the woman in the next village. The uncle kind of tracks him down and sort of blackmails the woman that he has an affair with to shop him in. And in the end, he's ends similarly to film insofar as he is about to get away with it until the real Martin turns up. But the way they decide the case is that with two men both claiming to be Martin Guerre there, the judge just tells Bertrand, choose which one. And she is a pious woman, so she kneels in front of the real husband. And then in like the last sort of half page of the book, basically, she kneels in front of the real Martin Guerre, so they condemn the imposter off to death. He gets it executed, and in the same paragraph, the wife, who was pregnant at the time, dies of emotional exhaustion. So at the end, pretty much everybody dies. So it's really quite different and not nearly as ambiguous and clever and interesting as the film. The film is a much better version of the story, I think.
Do you see people in the hospital coming in and dying of emotional exhaustion very often?
Every week. I get tired of writing that on death certificates. You're right, yes. Hysteria, that's the other one that they're always dying of, yes. Oh, dreadful it is.
Great.
I'm as normal, I'm going to whine on again about the opening image. Insofar as the film opens with an image of a judge riding on horseback, negotiating a puddle as he makes his way to the village. And so I kind of think what they're driving at is this notion that justice is dirty and challenging.
Yeah, murky, muddy.
I think.
Yeah,
murky, isn't it? Yeah, that's the word, murky. That's what I should have written. So I think as an opening image, it does kind of set the tone for the rest of the film.
Yeah.
And the whole film looks, speaking of images, does look fantastic.
God, I love this, yeah. I love period stuff like this. I love the mud. I just love that it's dirty. People are wearing the same clothes. There's dirt on the clothes all the time. There's no makeup. There are very few baths that take place, it seems. I love the idea of a story set in 1542.
And it really looks like a medieval painting that's become animated, doesn't it?
It's really great.
It's really believable, just like the faces and the hair. And, it's brilliant.
And a lot of the sounds and the sights are just very late medieval. I guess it's great in that way. So it really captures something that we really can't live anymore. I don't think you can't really live those moments.
Well, thank God. I would say I liked having a bath
or a sauna. You'd think they'd have more saunas. Yeah, and I think it's worth mentioning the scene ends on Jean de Cora, who's been this I guess he's an adjudicator. He's the judge, I guess.
Yeah.
And his small posse is leaving town at the very end on this very, clear path. It's a road, they're coming in this muck and water. It's one guy alone, and then he's being sort of escorted out of the town after seeing justice done, I guess. And he's, it also it sort of opens on the next scene in the opening is kind of the Martin and Bertrand coming together. They're being married. They're talking about the dowries and all that. And then this last scene is really Martin and Bertrand being torn apart. Of course, it's the fake Martin Guerre, but something bringing together and tearing apart. Also, some sort of classic bookends.
I cannot remember the real Martin Guerre actually being present in that last scene. Is he still there, or is he just cleared off now that he's shopped his imposter in?
I think he's kind of. I think he is there in the distance. He's in the background.
He is, okay. Is he okay?
Because his Bertrand, the wife, is in the foreground because the focus is really more on her and how she's reacting to it.
Well, I mean, that is one of my big revelations from watching this film again this time round. That I got to the end of the film and I thought, really, this film should be called Return of the Husband of Bertrand de Rolls.
Yeah.
Because it's primarily her film, isn't it?
Yes.
I think she is a much more interesting, nuanced, subtle character than Arnaud / Martin. I think she has some real ambiguity. She learns something. She kind of goes through a journey, doesn't she?
Yes.
She changes.
Yeah.
Whereas Arnaud, Gerard Depardieu's character, kind of does not. It doesn't really learn anything. He just tries to get away with it, until eventually he's rumbled and he can't back his way out. And then he says, "Oh, I'm sorry," and dies. Whereas she goes through a real kind of proper journey. Really, it is her film, I think.
Yeah, it is in a way. Yeah, and there's there's a journey for the Martin Guerre character from like a bad husband to a good husband, but it's a totally different man. So you're right. It's not much of a journey. And he's a liar as well. I mean, he's probably a good liar. He's more charming. He's a better father. He's a better husband than the real Martin Guerre. So the journey is, I agree with you. It's more about her. And it's, it's interesting. The questioning is always, is he your husband? Is he your husband? I think you're right. This film could be the husband, the real husband of Bertrand. Is it Bertrand de Roy or something like that? I forget what her husband is. And she can always answer that question honestly by saying yes, yes, yes. It's not because the question is here in the film is sort of like, what is a marriage? She has a real marriage with the Gerard Depardieu Martin Guerre. I mean, they're really connected. They're married in that sense. So. It's always, it's always this question of, what is your relationship to him? And she can honestly say that she is my husband because he treats her better than the other, right? But they don't ask, is he Martin Guerre? If they ask, is he Martin Guerre, it's a different question. She might have answered that honestly. But because they're always saying, is he your husband? Is your husband? Yes, he's my husband. Or are you married? Yes, we are married, because that's what she thinks of as a marriage. But they never ask her, I don't think once, is he the real Martin Guerre? Until we get later on, the very climax, of course. Because she would, if they asked him, is he Martin Guerre? I think she would probably say, no.
Yeah, I've traded him in for a better model.
Exactly, yeah. So it's interesting in that light. And there are these just a ton of great moments where I love the fact when the first time she sees the Gerard Depardieu Martin Guerre, she's in the wash house or something like that. So there's all this steam and all this smoke. So steam from the water and smoke from the fires heating the water, and that's between her and Martin Guerre when he returns. So it's from the very moment you see her, there's always this doubt from the very outset because it's done cinematically with steam and smoke, and it's perfect. And similarly, this one shot that I didn't really catch, certainly the first time I saw it, but it's very clear, is that when Jean de Cora visits her at the end, and he wants to interrogate her again a little bit at the very end, when did you really know and all that, she turns around, she starts talking to him, and she's got maybe light black eyes, but she's been beaten by the old husband who's back in town now. So she's already, experiencing the abuse that you would expect from her original husband. And the judge he's not concerned with that at all. He doesn't note that. He doesn't care about that. They want to know, did they get the right guy? Are we killing the right? Are we executing the right man? So it's her, her happiness is not really at stake. That's not of interest to them. And it is her story because she, it's lovely that she gets the marriage that she wants, and then it's sort of taken away from her time and time again, really. And then finally, it's just no longer a possibility for them to be together.
I mean, I think watching the film now, it looks a lot like a kind of an essay on the limited economic opportunities available for women in the 16th century, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So everybody has authority over her, whether it's her uncle or her husband or her, putative husband or the local judiciary. Everybody, has a right to tell her what to do, what to think, how to behave. It's like, it's essentially there. I mean, it feels sadly like a pretty timely rewatch.
Yeah,
it's kind of a film about authorities denying a woman a right to choose or determine her own future, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So she's not allowed to choose the thing that makes her happy. She's largely treated as an object. She's either a vessel to produce children, or she is a manifestation of a contract over land ownership, or she's just a workhorse for cooking and pressing grapes by treading in a big barrel or whatever, isn't she? I mean, and also the other thing is that in this world, even her kind of sexual life, it was not private. It's like the whole village's business.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that they're not getting it on, and everybody considers it perfectly reasonable to shout out about, who she should be having sex with and who she shouldn't. And, but conversely, there is this kind of, incredible moment of sort of emancipation, I suppose, because she learns to write her name, doesn't she?
Yeah.
This is like this big kind of educational milestone. Look, here's a woman who can write her name.
Mm-hmm.
And she's certainly of all the villages, apart from Arnaud, the fake Martin, she's the only person that we see write. But even when she learns to write her own name, it becomes a little bit of a plot point that she can deny that she made her mark on this piece of paper, because she explains, well, I could have written my name if it was me who made that mark. Mm-hmm. But it still doesn't actually make her the equal of the men who are making all her choices for her.
Exactly.
And she largely still gets dismissed and ignored. Her opinion still isn't that important, even though she can write her name.
Yeah.
It's pretty dismal being a woman then. Blimmin' heck.
Must have been, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, a lot of work, a lot of children, not a lot of entertainment, tough times. But I think they're captured really well in this film. And at the same time, I think, there's a lot of this collective action of, they're farming together, they're stomping grapes together, they're doing all these things. In some ways, it seems like it's a nice outdoorsy life where you're just, providing for yourselves and not worrying about a lot of other senseless things that we do in this day and age. But at the same time, it was even worse for women, because that's all they had is at work. And then, just suffering a lot of abuse or underestimation from men again and again.
Yay! Good things. Good job. Things have changed today,
Some changes, yeah. I would talk a little bit about. I guess there are a couple of things I would talk about. Really clear act breaks. I felt like in this film. It's like there's this wonderful scene when they're finally alone. As you're right, privacy is really a precious commodity in this community. And there's this moment when Martin Guerre's back, and they're finally sort of in their bedroom together, and they hug, and she just has this exhale that, it's like her entire old life is out, and this new life is coming back in, and it's a really audible sigh of relief and release. And that's where it kind of then, Martin Guerre sort of gets himself entrenched back into the community. And then there's this midpoint where there's this big democratic moment where the townspeople vote quite publicly that he is Martin Guerre, and he's freed at the midpoint. And then there's sort of this very shortish, I guess, third act, which is pointed out by the fact that the old Martin Guerre comes back to sort of disprove that Gerard Depardieu's character is indeed an imposter and taking his place. So the act breaks are really, really clear and really, really strong moments, I think. But structurally, this thing is all about interrogation, isn't it? You said he's constantly in court, and I counted 5 different interrogation scenes, basically. It's like one trial after another, and they do change sets or locations a couple of times. But there's this, and the exposition is really well done. Actually, there's this initial interview that gets us into the story there, where Cora is interrogating Bertrand, and that's sort of the I guess the solo exposition device where she's alone and she's giving some story. There is a brief narrator at the beginning and the end, which is another little motif. But then there's this whole village sort of trial, and that's when they vote to say, oh, no, he is Martin Guerre, and they accept him. And then Guerre's just with Cora for a while in another holding facility. And then they say, okay, that's not enough. We need the whole city to come back to the larger town. And then everyone really just makes the trip into this, I guess it's Toulouse, you thought. And then finally, there's another interrogation in this church setting where he's really on his own defense, and that's ultimately when the old Martin Guerre comes back. So I mean, the other thing is, like, there are two Martin Guerres and there are two returns in the film too. So it's the title has a couple different meanings because it's the Return of Martin Guerre, but which one really? I mean, I think it's got to be the Depardieu Martin Guerre, but it's probably, to a certain extent, it's the other. You could call this the Returns of Martin Guerre. But if you like courtroom drama, that's kind of what this is. And it's interesting because it is it's a very sort of pagan courtroom drama. I mean, the language is not overly elevated. The witnesses, most of them don't know how to read or write. God gets in there a bunch. Oh, he's the devil, or there's part of the devil in him. That's one of the arguments against him not being Martin Guerre. I mean, it's just, it's interesting because there are a number of different interrogations, and they all have this different nature and different location. But this film is interrogation, interrogation, interrogation.
They really lean quite hard on the Christian sort of imagery or the religious imagery, which I sort of enjoy. I think after the village hearing, when the initial time when he is vindicated, and the judges say, "Yes, you're the real Martin Guerre. We'll be off now." And then there's a scene, isn't there, where Bertrand washes his feet. It's a real kind of Mary Magdalene moment. Yeah. They're kind of, and the sheer idea of someone who is a savior who returns, I think they are kind of, they're trying to massage this kind of Christ-like metaphor in there all the way through, and the way that people invoke God, and there's a blind woman who sees him, but she sees him with her fingers, and they're sort of invoking this notion of magic, and like you say, they're kind of saying, well, it was the devil. It reminded me a little bit of the Northman, insofar as it's another one of those films where it's trying to get inside that medieval mindset and trying to understand the way that somebody from 400, 500 years ago would have seen the world.
Yeah, I would have said, if we did a cliche call on this one, it's the blind seeing better than the sighted, because that old woman's just feeling his face, and, of course she's going to say that's Martin. It's just, there are some laughable moments, but I think, that would have been taken seriously perhaps in 1540s, so, oof. Yeah, great stuff. There's also a moment where I think the theme is stated quite openly, the way that it is in A Different Man, is that when he first comes back, I think someone asks him, Martin, have you changed for the better? And I think they realized that, like the original Martin Guerre hated farming. He was not happy. He'd been teased in this small community where he grew up. There's this surreal mock bear hunt scene where he's dressed up as a bear and everyone else is flogging him with sticks, and he's a laughing stock because he's not having sex with his wife. And the guy was not a happy dude, so he wanted to leave that. So he did, he deserted his wife, he deserted his family. So he just did not seem happy, and he didn't seem very kind. He's a terrible father, terrible husband. So it's interesting that one character asks him straight up, have you changed for the better, early on? And then I think, the two films are about change, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. But I think that is a theme that's definitely just sitting there and articulated quite obviously.
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of a cheat that in the early part of the film, when you're watching they're sort of children when they get married.
Yes, oh, definitely.
Martin and Bertrand.
Yeah.
But the actor they have chosen to play the young Martin looks an awful lot like a young Gerard Depardieu.
Yes.
And does not look very much like the actor who comes back to play the adult Martin Guerre. Yeah. So I do feel like that is a little bit of a cheat on the part of the film.
Yeah.
But if they made it too obvious, then then you would ruin the ambiguity.
Yeah.
And I find it difficult to recall what it was like watching the film for the first time around. I don't think there will be many people going into this movie unaware that there will be some controversy over whether Martin Guerre is the real deal or not.
Yeah.
But I wonder if you saw the film without knowing anything about it, would it strike you as surprising when it turns out that it's all a lie? I'm not sure. I keep going back to the notion that the novel, didn't consider that a worthwhile strategy, that there is no mystery in the novel. Is there mystery in the movie, or is there actually no mystery? Is it actually pretty explicit that this guy's an imposter right from the beginning? I can't imagine watching the film with naive eyes.
Yeah.
Do you think it's too obvious, or was it ambiguous to you?
It's hard to answer the question because I've seen it and I've known about this film for so long, and I've even seen Summersby. So I think it is pretty obvious, and I think it doesn't hurt it though, because this story knows where it's going. And there's that moment where he's about to be declared innocent for the last time, and it's set up, perfectly where, the real Martin Guerre just happens to walk into the church at that moment. So I think this film really knows what it's doing at every moment, and I don't think it matters that you know that. I mean, there are these moments of doubts where there's some people he can't place. I mean, he's never seen any of these people when he comes back to the community, and he's fishing for clues to help him address them with the right name. And I think you get that feeling early on. And even in the community, I think the community has doubts from the very first. It's I don't know if it's not a sophisticated village because they're not educated and whatnot, but they know who their son or their cousin or their nephew is, or their husband is. So I think it's pretty clear all along. But it's to a certain extent, and this probably, I think, echoes some of your themes of how it relates to today's politics. It's more like a collected belief, right? We want to believe something, so we're going to believe that this good guy is going to replace that bastard who left us, 8 years ago, right? And he's we've upgraded. We've made an upgrade. So I think there's that collective belief aspect about this. So I don't think it matters because I just don't think that's what the story is about. It's really about all these interrogations and trying to find the truth. And knowing that we're going to get to someplace that is unexpected. I mean, I think the real surprise is the fact that the other guy comes back. They're assuming he's dead, and maybe we can't accept this guy because the other Martin Guerre is dead. And the last name Guerre is war, so it's not this soldier and all that. I think there's some play on that too. So I think if the other Martin Guerre doesn't come back, he's been declared innocent more or less, and he can go on living in the community. So I think that's the real surprise there. And it's this sort of this Deus ex machina moment that doesn't solve all the problems; it actually causes all the problems. Because now she has to go back to the awful husband from before. So it's again similar to the other film in that way too.
What if the moral that you come away thinking is don't get greedy? If Martin Guerre hadn't started asking his uncle about the 8 years worth of rent that he was owed, absolutely, maybe it all would have been fine.
Yep. That's the only reason they start getting more suspicious. Yeah.
Well, you've already kind of hinted at it. Well, we will try and bring these two films together. And I think putting them next side by side is very interesting. Actually, I think there are some interesting things to learn. But before we do that, I'm going to force you. In front of the members of Parliament of the Toulouse judiciary to play my favourite game. This is the film. This is the game they should have played in Martin Guerre. Yes. We're going to play Who Am I?
Who am I?
Oh man, I feel like we're all going to stand up and say, "I am Martin Guerre. I am Martin Guerre."
I'm worried now if I give the right answer, I might be burned at the stake. So it's high. This is
Spartacus.
High
We're
risk.
all Spartacus. There you go.
So as always, there were doctors in this week's films.
Yes.
So there were like a bunch of doctors in A Different Man. But I thought all of the doctors were either like they were a bit weird.
Yeah, they were.
Or they were a bit thick.
Yeah.
None of the doctors were people that I thought, oh yeah, I want to be like him.
Yeah.
They all seemed to kind of just a bit odd. So I think if I feel like anybody from this week's movies, and I think this is how the film is supposed to work. I feel like Edward in A Different Man.
Okay, yeah.
Insofar as I can empathise with that idea of watching other people have a good time while wondering how do you do that?
Yeah,
just kind of feeling uncomfortable in his own skin, whatever form that skin takes. I certainly have felt like that at times. Sometimes I still do, but I think that's how the film is supposed to function, isn't it? So it's not. I don't think it's like a big confession on my part. I think that's what the film is supposed to do. It makes you remember those times when you felt uncomfortable in your own skin.
Yeah.
But how about you?
I feel like I am Ingrid, the neighbor to
the successful playwright. Well done.
I was going to say small-time playwright, who's a bit distracted and more interested in living in a nudist community in Canada, where they take drugs and stuff. That's my jam right there. I'm Ingrid.
Man, that sounds like such an awesome jam. Man, I wish I felt like I'd identify with her. That sounds brilliant.
That dinner conversation in A Different Man is kind of funny at the end, where Oswald's saying, I can't keep up with her. She wants to just have sex and do drugs all the time, so we found this nudist community in Canada. Blame it on the Canadians. Oh, man. I thought that was quite funny. So I would say I'm closer to Ingrid than Edward, but I definitely see that. Yeah, the film is definitely set up where we really are supposed to relate to Edward. We've got the ups, we've got the downs. It feels this whole idea of trying to change who you are, or improve yourself, or make yourself more suitable, more adjusted to society. I think that's all very real stuff that we all struggle with. So Edward is all of us. I am Edward.
I am Edward.
Except for this week, I'm more Ingrid, I think.
Right, let's. I feel I've learned just very slightly too much there. So let's draw those two films together. We will do our synthesis. See if we can make something out of laying them side by side.
There's so much here, I think.
There is a lot here, isn't it? It's just, the first thing I read is it's these films are they're both sort of about transformation, aren't they?
Yep.
And this is like a fundamental story, isn't it? The story of transformation is like one of those basic building blocks of human storytelling. It's like it's Ovid, isn't it? It's Beauty and the Beast. It's the Frog and the Princess. It's like so many fairy tales are about transformation. Yeah. It's just something at the heart of what it means to be human. And often those sort of those fairy tales about transformation are usually they're sort of about puberty or kind of sexual awakening or making the journey from childhood to adulthood. And I'm not sure that either of these films are quite like that. And they are both, I wrote here on my notes, they are both about characters without sexual actuation becoming sexually gratified, I think. I don't think either of the transforming characters in this film are sort of about, it's not that they go from immaturity to becoming adults, though. They start having sex where before they didn't, but that's not the same as growing up.
Yeah.
And I think both of these films sort of agree with that. So in A Different Man, Edward becomes a new person sort of after he has sex in a bar toilet for the first time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really change who he is. In the same way that Arno, he kind of, he inherits somebody else's wife, and they both enjoy their new sex life together, but he doesn't really learn anything from this.
Yeah.
And then I've read here that Bertrand only really learns that her happiness is important to her, but it's not important to God, and it's not important to the rest of the world.
Yeah.
So I wrote underneath that, the real lesson of both of these films, the world is not invested in your happiness. You have to go and get it for yourself. That's what I took away from the two of them.
That's good. That's good. I'll pick up where you were first on transformation. And there's this question, I think, in the two films. I think I'll phrase it this way. Can a man change his life literally versus can a man change his life figuratively? And I think what I mean in that is that it's a very physical, very real transformation for Edward. that doesn't really change his life very much. And it's a very literally a change for Martin Guerre, or the Depardieu character, in the sense that, he's learned, right? He's one of the only guys who can read and write, and he uses words again and again to transform himself or to try and convince the world that he is someone who he's not. So I think there's a question of how we transform that's at the heart of the two films. There's some obvious things like a female protagonist who sort of wants or has two men in her life. That's going on in both films for sure. Because Ingrid, she sort of wants Edward at first. He disappears. She wants Oswald, and who seems like, again, someone coming back to her. The Oswald seems like a better version of the Edward guy. So there's a very strong connection between the two films. I think there are some other things, acceptance and inclusion, like Martin Guerre immediately being sort of accepted back into the community, even though they're not even sure that it's the right Martin Guerre. Acceptance and inclusion all over A Different Man. I think it's in most of the scenes, really. There are some story world things that are interesting too, like
right.
The bad guy gets better in the old film versus the good guy gets bad in the newer film. So he doesn't get a lot worse. Like Edward is not a really bad character, a malicious character, but he's not as nice as he was before the facial changes. And similarly, like the story worlds, like Depardieu comes back. He's been out in the world and he comes back into this small community, this small space, whereas the changes in his physical character for Edward, he starts in this very small world, which is essentially his apartment, maybe his doctor's offices, and then he enters this bigger world with his transformation. So they're sort of being tested in different ways, but they're experiencing either like mirrored stories or reflection or converse stories, ultimately, I guess.
For all this transformation, none of the main characters are never happy at the end of these films, are they?
No.
I mean, at the end of Martin Guerre, basically no one is happy. Everyone is either dead, or they are now kind of cowed, or they are just sort of hollow and incomplete, or people are afraid of them. No one is dancing around the maple tree at the end of that. I don't know what that means, but no one is happy at the end of that film. Whereas, and the same at the end of A Different Man. I mean, Edward might think that he's unhappy at the start of that film, but I think he's unhappier by the end of it, isn't it?
Yeah.
So at the end of the film, what he's confronted with in that restaurant is what could have been.
Yeah. Yep.
And it doesn't even necessarily say that, you should have just stuck to being the guy that you were before, because if he had just remained as the same guy with the same face, he still wouldn't have had Ingrid. It's just, it's like this is what could have been if you changed the thing about yourself you didn't change, rather than if you changed the thing that you did change about yourself. It's like it spells out, it wasn't your appearance that stopped you from having the life you wanted. It was just you. Because I was wondering at the end of that movie, in that final image of Edward, he is kind of laughing, isn't he? And I was wondering whether maybe in that final moment of the movie, that is the moment when he accepts himself.
Yeah.
When he does that, he does the Lady Gaga thing, that, at last he overcomes unhappiness by accepting himself, just in that final 3-4 seconds of the movie.
Yeah.
But if he does, we never see the consequences. I don't know whether I feel confident about that or not. I don't know. So I'm going to stick with my suggestion that at the end of the movies, the protagonists, the main characters, are all broadly unhappy. So change is not a positive thing for any of these people, really.
Doesn't really work out for them, no. Yeah, so maybe we just stay who we are.
Just stay who you are.
These are two films about men's lives being taken away from other men, and maybe they should have just stay in their lane.
I did write. I made another note here, which is that in 2024, we live in a world where identity is more routinely malleable than it has ever been before. Insofar as people have, people use pseudonyms on Twitter, don't they, and Reddit, and it's okay to have this kind of online identity which is not immediately connected to your real world identity.
Yep.
And the internet is full of deep fakes and photoshops, and it's full of misinformation and scams and imposters and people trying to get your details.
Yep.
It's almost like I'm questioning kind of what does constitute identity now? If many people will routinely have many identities, I feel like the only people in the world now who really unambiguously know your full identical self, the only people who really, really know you are advertisers, because they can use cookies to track you down to the nearest square meter. Yep. They know everything that you've clicked on, everything you're interested in, everything which is adjacent to the things you're interested in. They know us better than anybody else.
Yeah.
Everything else is a little bit wobbly and ambiguous, but advertisers, they get right to the core of what it is to be a human. Is that the world we want? I don't know.
It's very ironic, but yes, it is. Sinister. I like where you're going with that because I like the darkness.
Well, I enjoyed these films this week, and now I feel a bit down about the whole process.
I thought they were great. I really enjoyed both of them. It's a good week. Lots to think about, and lots of really good takeaways from both films.
Well, we have just, after all that thinking, oh my goodness, we've just got enough time to talk about what else has been playing at this theatre. Do you want to go first?
It's been a great week. I'm going on. I have to confess, I had my own mini two-wheeler moment this last couple of weeks. So I didn't include you. I'm sorry. All this acceptance and inclusion, and I'm not practicing those things at all. I saw two films. First up, I saw The Lost Children on Netflix. Which is a film about some four Colombian kids who survive it's an airplane crash, and they're in the Amazon. And one reason, the connection for us is it was scored by a friend of the pod, Patrick Johnson, who's done
fantastic.
Really focusing on scoring documentaries, and he's done another great job here. Really good film.
He is a very talented musician. He is
super musician, great guy. And so it's on Netflix. Check it out. It paired very well with a film called Lost on a Mountain in Maine. True story, 1939, I believe it was. A boy named Don Fendler got lost after summiting the mountain, and he spent 9 days, I think it was. 9 days in the wilds with people looking for him. This is a book that everyone reads. He wrote a book, or told the story to a writer when he was 13 or 14. It's a classic book. We all read it in school here. And my class, it was about 9 years ago, I had my 10th graders read the book. They really liked it. It's just compelling. It's great for kids to read. And then Don Fendler was a really nice guy. He retired not far from where the incident happened, and he was known for going into schools and talking to students. So we sent him a letter. He was he turned 90 when we wrote the letters to him, and I'm sitting in front of a 3-page letter that he wrote back to me in rickety old handwriting, and he wrote every one of my students a short note as well, included this sort of highlighted map that he showed people where he was in the park and how he was getting lost, and then he sent it all in a packet to me. So I've got his envelope and his handwriting on it, and it's lovely. Awesome. This film, if you look at the trailer, it looks awful. And I just wanted to share that little bit about trailers because, we went into this very reluctantly and ended up loving the film. But it's really, really cliche. They chose all the bad dialogue moments. And I think we need to understand that trailers are very often made before the film is fully edited. They're getting footage, and they're also made very often by people who make trailers, not the people who make the film. So they chose some really bad scenes and some really bad acting moments. So the trailer does not sell this film. And in fact, it really hurts the film. But I would recommend Lost on a Mountain in Maine to folks. And just to Don Fendler, thank you so much, and rest in power. He died about 4 months after he wrote these letters to my students. So he made it to 90, and then I think he died in October of 2015 or 2016. So great story there. I would recommend that. And then I saw another film. Sorry, I'm taking up so much time. It was a big week. I saw Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat, which is both a great film about U.S. jazz in the 1960s. It features Louis Armstrong, Dizzy Gillespie, John Coltrane, Max Roach, Art Blakey, Miriam Makeba, Nina Simone, Duke Ellington.
Oh, my goodness. All right.
It's also simultaneously a great political documentary about the overthrow of Patrice Lumumba, I guess he was elected president in Congo, but the U.S. and Belgium, using kind of the United Nations indirectly, ultimately had him assassinated. So it's two great films, and then it's yet not one good film. It's combined into these. It's just overly long. They just needed to cut this thing back. It's kind of like watching a thesis, because there are all these quotes that come up on stage, so on screen. So you're reading quotes, and they're even sort of cited. The sources are cited. There's just a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be in there. And the jazz is great, and the politics are great, but they sort of detract from one another. It's like too much of a good thing, and it's long. 2.5 hours. So I'm going to recommend it. I would do it on streaming service. We saw it in a gallery setting. There, the crowd was there. We were all getting kind of impatient. At one point, the feed stopped somehow. So then we had to go back. It was a 5 or 10 minute delay. Then we went back and we ended up watching 5 minutes of it that we'd already seen, and that was like you could sort of hear the audience go. So it took about 3 hours to get through the film. So great music. It would have been a great jazz documentary, but they are all mixed in there. It makes sense why all these jazz artists are in there. They're part of the story, but I think it just needed to be edited down. But it's called Soundtrack to a Coup d'Etat. How about yourself? I hope
you had a fantastic week.
It was a pretty good week. It was a pretty good week.
My week has been extremely lowbrow by comparison, as always. Did you expect anything different? So sadly, no jazz documentaries. And no personal connections to the film either. This week, my nephew was visiting us. He's 20. He likes horror films.
Ooh, yeah.
And it was just him and me in the house on Saturday night. Everyone else was out. So we watched No One Will Save You.
Ooh.
Which is a new, I think, out last year, science fiction horror film. And I like to think if you and I were asked to write a science fiction horror film, it is not a million miles away from the sort of thing that we might hope to write, insofar as, so it's an alien invasion movie. It's a woman who she lives on her own. She wakes up in the middle of the night to find an alien snooping around her house.
Ooh.
And the alien has other friends, and she has a pretty horrifying, terrifying time. But the whole film is more or less without any dialogue at all. There is barely a word in the whole film. In fact, there is only one clearly spoken line. Everything else is just silent. And for the most of the time, it's this woman on her own. There's no one there for her to speak to. There's no need for her to speak. There are like a few moments when it's a little bit of a stretch. And I was watching thinking, if I was in that situation, I probably would have said something at that point. But largely, it's successful.
Good.
Surprise, surprise. They should have listened to Andres Lorente, because it does struggle with the ending.
Oh, no.
We got to the end, and the two of us, we looked at each other and we went, huh?
That's how it ends?
But endings are hard.
They are.
If I did personally know the filmmakers, I would tell them to take a leaf out of your book and start by writing the ending, which is some of the best advice I've ever had. So they kind of should have done that. But there's an awful lot to enjoy. I really admire the ambition and the tenacity to get through like a whole 90-minute feature film with just one line of dialogue and
that's amazing.
Did the whole thing successfully. So well done. The Rafifi of alien sci-fi horror. Well done.
Yeah, and honestly, people would probably look at my stories and say, he doesn't know how to end a story. Same thing, right? It's a perspective thing. Especially if, it's like reading. I mean, if you read things from left to right or right to left, and then the ending is the beginning and the beginning is the end.
That's why all those manga comics I'm reading don't make any sense.
Yes,
now I get it.
You're reading them wrong. Yeah.
On Instagram, we are at 2 Real Cinema Club. Read the blog at 2realcinemaclub.com. Comment on our YouTube channel or email us. We do love your emails, and however rude they might be. We are 2realcinemaclub@gmail.com. Next time, we are watching another film with no dialogue in, I believe. Next time we are watching
Flow,
which is a new Latvian animated film.
Mm-hmm.
And we are comparing it to...
Well, Flo has kitty cats. Let's make that clear. Or a kitty cat. I think Flo is a cat. We're comparing it to Princess Mononoke. Is it Mononoke?
Princess Mononoke from Studio Ghibli.
Yeah, Miyazaki. That's I think it's like 97, 98. I'm not really sure.
Something like that.
Wait, I've got it up on screen. 1997, yeah.
1997. Fantastic. So into the world of animals, I'm hoping then maybe a donkey will make an appearance.
I can guarantee. Well, I shouldn't say that. I'm hoping there's a donkey. There's got to be a donkey.
I'm hoping there's a donkey appearance.
Minor character.
Thanks for joining us as always. So back with animals next time. Join us at the Popcorn Counter next week for some old nonsense. And we will see you then. Thanks and goodbye.
Goodbye.